Zara lay face down in the red dirt. Her armor was cracked, her body bleeding, her mind barely awake. The sky above was dark and filled with smoke. The sounds of war were fading, but the pain in her chest stayed. She had trusted her team, fought beside them, bled for them, but in the end, they left her behind like broken trash. They said nothing, no goodbye, no honor, just a cold glance and a silent retreat. Zara's hands shook as she tried to crawl. Every movement felt like fire in her veins. She was alone, and she knew it. Her people had betrayed her. They wanted her dead, and they thought she was already gone. She almost wished they were right, almost miles away. A human soldier named Jake was walking through the ruins. He was on a solo recon mission, checking for signs of life. The battle here was brutal. Humans and aliens had both lost too much. Jake's boots crunched over broken stone and metal. His eyes scanned everything, his weapon ready. Then he saw something strange in the dust. A body. At first, he thought it was another dead alien. But then her arm moved slightly, just a twitch, but enough. Jake slowly walked closer. His weapon pointed low but ready. She was alive, barely. Her breathing was slow, shallow, and her skin was pale blue. He had never seen an alien this close before. Not like this. She looked young, like a soldier his age. Blood ran from her lips, and her eyes were half open. But when she saw him, her eyes burned with anger. She tried to reach for her weapon, but she couldn't even lift her hand. Jake could have walked away. He could have reported her and let her die, but something stopped him. She looked like someone who had been hurt too many times, not just by enemies, but by people she once trusted. He didn't understand her pain, but he knew what betrayal looked like. He had seen it in the eyes of soldiers left behind. He had felt it himself once. Jake knelt beside her, slowly, showing his hands. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. She didn't understand his words, but his tone was calm. She stared at him, confused, weak, but still full of pride. He opened a water pack and held it to her lips. She turned her head, refusing, still fighting. Even now, Jake sighed and stood. He looked around and saw no one. But this place was not safe. War never ended cleanly, and soldiers came back to finish what they started. He couldn't leave her here. He didn't even know why, but he couldn't. Jake picked her up slowly. She groaned in pain but didn't scream. She was heavier than he expected, her armor thick and damaged. Still, he carried her, step by step, through the ruins. Zara felt the movement but couldn't fight it. She didn't know this human, didn't trust him, but he was warm. And her body was cold. She drifted in and out of sleep as the world moved past. She remembered voices yelling, fire burning, and the moment her commander walked away, she had screamed his name, but he didn't stop. She had given everything, and they had given her nothing. Now she was in the arms of the enemy. But this enemy didn't spit at her, didn't curse her, didn't let her die. Why? Jake reached an old bunker, hidden under a broken ridge. He kicked the door and it opened with a groan. Inside, it was dark, cold, and filled with dust. But it was shelter. He laid Zara down on a thick blanket. Her eyes opened for a second, just long enough to see the human looking down at her. He lit a small fire with a flare and some dry scraps. He didn't speak, just worked. He cleaned her wounds with shaking hands. He didn't know alien biology, but bleeding was bleeding. Pain was pain. She watched him in silence, too weak to speak, too tired to fight. But she didn't close her eyes. She didn't want to die just yet. Not before she understood why this enemy saved her. Not before she saw what he truly wanted. Outside the bunker, the wind blew cold and sharp. But inside, the fire cracked softly. Two enemies sat in silence, not knowing each other. Not knowing that fate had already tied their paths together. Not knowing that this moment would change everything. And far in the distance, someone else had seen Jake carry her. Someone who now knew she was still alive, and that was a problem. Zara woke up to the soft glow of firelight. Her body hurt, but the sharp pain was now a dull throb. She tried to move and found her arm bandaged. her chest wrapped. The warmth around her came not from armor or tech but from a fire. She turned her head slowly and saw the human again. He sat near the entrance of the bunker, holding a metal box and eating. From it, he looked tired but calm. His weapon was nearby, but not in his hands. Zara watched him quietly, her mind still foggy. She didn't understand his kindness. No human would help her, not like this. Her people said humans were cruel, selfish liars. But this one had carried her, healed her, and asked for nothing. Still, her heart did not trust him. Kindness could be a trap too. Jake noticed her awake and smiled. He pointed at the food, and then at her, slowly offering some. Zara stared, her pride screaming no, but her body too weak to argue. She took it from him with shaking fingers, her eyes never leaving his. The taste was strange but warm. Jake spoke. Softly, even though he knew she didn't understand, he told her his name, said it slowly. Jake, he repeated, pointing at himself. Zara blinked, confused, but repeated the sound quietly. He smiled wider, like a child hearing his name from a stranger. Then he pointed at her, tilting his head, asking for her name. She hesitated, but then said it, low and soft. Zara. It was the first time she had spoken since the betrayal. It tasted like fire and ash in her mouth, but it was real. He nodded and repeated it, gently, Zara. She watched him move around the shelter, placing metal scrap in front of the door. He checked his gear and made notes on a broken datapad. Zara saw that he was careful, trained, but not cruel. He treated her like a soldier, not a prisoner. Still, her body tensed with every step he took. Her instincts didn't trust easily, and her memories screamed warnings. She remembered her squads. Cold voices, the way they turned away when she fell. Now she was here with someone who should have hated her, and he hadn't even asked who she was. That was the strangest thing. He didn't want anything, not her name, her mission, or her secrets. He just sat there, watching the flames, breathing slow. Hours passed, and the wind outside grew louder. Zara finally sat up, her legs shaking under her. Jake stood quickly and tried to help. She growled, pushing his hands away. She would stand on her own, even if it killed her. He stepped back and nodded, letting her do it her way. She limped to the entrance and looked out. The sky was still dark, the ruins cold and broken. She could see where her people had left her. Far beyond the smoke, her fists clenched, pain and rage growing in her chest. But then she saw movement, small, quick, just outside the shadows. A blinking red light flashed once and vanished. Zara froze, her heart pounding. Someone had found them. She turned sharply to Jake and pointed, drawing a quick sign in the dirt. Jake watched her hand, then followed her stare. His eyes narrowed, and he grabbed his weapon without a word. They both crouched low, barely breathing. Jake peeked out from behind the door and scanned the ruins. Zara's instincts told her it wasn't human scouts. No, they moved too quietly, like hunters, not soldiers. Jake seemed to know it too. He turned back to her and made a hand signal. She didn't know what it meant, but she understood the feeling. Prepare to move. Together, they packed fast. Jake gave her a new knife and a small pistol. Zara took them without a word, her hands steady. She didn't ask why he gave them to her. She just accepted. He had given her a choice. She could leave or she could follow. She looked out into the ruins, then back at him, and without speaking, she followed. The ruins were cold and silent as they crept through the rubble. Each sound felt like thunder in the quiet night. Zara moved slowly, her wounds still fresh. Jake helped her climb broken walls, covering her steps. She started to feel a strange trust growing inside her. Not deep, not yet, but enough to stay close. They reached a collapsed bridge and rested under it, hiding in the shadows. Jake pulled out a small scanner, the screen blinking with red dots. Enemies closing in. Zara pointed at a tunnel nearby. Jake nodded. They moved fast, silent like ghosts. Behind them, voices echoed through the ruins in a strange alien tongue. They were being hunted, but not because she was a traitor, because she was still alive and someone didn't want her. To stay that way, she looked at Jake as they ran. She didn't know where they were going, but for the first time since the betrayal, she wasn't running alone. Zara ran through the ash-covered ruins with blood in her mouth and fire in her eyes. Her legs felt heavy, her chest burned, but she didn't stop. Behind her, plasma shots lit up the night sky. Each blast hit closer, throwing dust and rock into the air. Jake was just ahead, his boots thudding over broken stone. He didn't look back, but he slowed down just enough for her to catch up. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Their only language now was survival. Zara ducked behind a crumbling wall, gasping for breath. Jake slid beside her and peeked around the edge. 3 enemy scouts were moving fast. Their bodies were covered in black armor, silent and deadly. They weren't soldiers, no flags, no mercy. They were hunters, hired to kill. And she was the prize. Zara touched the deep cut across her side. Blood leaked through the bandage, warm and sticky. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind stayed sharp. She had survived betrayal, pain, and fire. She wouldn't fall now. Not when someone was finally standing with her. Jake looked at her and held up 2 fingers, then pointed to the right. She nodded, understanding the signal split and flank. He trusted her to cover him. Even when she was half dead, that trust felt heavier than any weapon in her hand. She slipped through the shadows like a ghost. Every step was careful, slow, silent. She could hear the hunters speaking in code. Their voices were cold, like machines. One of them turned toward her direction, too fast. Zara didn't think, she just moved. She leapt forward, knife in hand, and drove the blade under his arm. The hunter dropped without a sound, but the others saw the flash of movement. They raised their weapons, just as Jake's rifle opened fire from behind. One fell immediately, the other turned to fire too late. Zara's pistol spoke once, and the last hunter dropped. The air went quiet again, thick with smoke and fear. Jake walked over to her slowly, eyes scanning the bodies. She didn't look at the dead, she looked at him. He nodded once, his face calm, but his hands were shaking. He had just killed to protect her, not for orders, not for war, for her. They dragged the bodies into the rubble and covered them with stone. Zara didn't speak, but her eyes held questions. Jake finally looked at her and said 2 words. "Not safe." She nodded, already knowing. Whoever sent those hunters wouldn't stop. The question wasn't if more would come, it was when they moved again, deeper into the dead city. Zara limped as they walked, but she didn't complain. Jake offered to carry her once, and she snarled at him. He laughed softly, the first time she had heard his voice without tension. It was a strange sound, warm and almost human, she found herself wanting to hear it again. They found shelter under a broken shuttle, its metal belly blackened by fire. Inside, it was cold but dry. Jake started building a small fire again. Zara sat with her back to the wall, watching him work. Her fingers traced the weapon in her lap. She was trained to fight humans, but no one had trained her for this. This strange human who treated her like a person, not an enemy, not a threat, not a tool. Hours passed, and the fire burned low. Zara finally spoke, her voice rough and quiet. "Why?" Jake looked up from his fire, confused. She pointed at herself, then at him. "Why help?" Jake was silent for a moment, then said one word, "Right." He pointed at his chest, then at her heart. Right thing. Zara didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. He hadn't saved her for reward or orders or revenge. He saved her because he believed it was the right thing to do. In her world, that kind of belief had died a long time ago. Outside, the wind howled through the dead city, but inside the broken shuttle, 2 enemies sat by a fire. Not as enemies anymore, not as strangers. Zara leaned back, still holding her weapon, but for the first time in days, she closed her eyes without fear. She didn't trust the world, but maybe, just maybe, she could start to trust him. Far above them, a satellite blinked and turned, tracking their heat signature. Someone else now knew where they were, and this time, it wasn't just hunters. Asterisk, the silence between them had changed. It was no longer full of fear or anger. Now it held something softer, quieter but harder to understand. Zara sat by the dying fire, her legs crossed, her hands resting near her pistol. Jake was fixing the scanner, the small screen flickering in his lap. They hadn't spoken much, but they had started to understand each other through hand signs, body language, and simple words. They were building something, a kind of bridge, one step at a time. Jake pointed at the scanner, then at the door. "Bad," he said, tapping a blinking red dot. Zara frowned and looked outside through the shuttle's cracked window. The sky was too quiet, the air too still. That kind of quiet only came before trouble. She reached into her gear pouch and pulled out a small silver stone. It was smooth, marked with alien runes and pulsing dimly. Jake tilted his head, curious. She placed the stone on the ground and pressed it gently. A tiny hologram flickered to life, showing a rotating map. Jake leaned closer, and his eyes widened. He had never seen this side of the planet before, not from a human map. Zara began drawing in the dirt, connecting lines from the hologram to XenoDiva, their current location. She pointed to an old comms tower deep in the mountains, then at her chest, and made a speaking motion. Jake understood slowly. She wanted to speak to someone, or maybe warn someone, but she didn't have the words yet. That was the problem. Every time she tried to say more than a word or two, the sounds caught in her throat. Her language and his were too different, too broken, but she kept trying, and he kept listening. Later that night, as the fire burned low, Jake pulled out a small notebook. He tore a page and drew a picture of himself, a rough stick figure. Then he drew a picture of her, tall and strong with big eyes. Zara gave him a confused look but didn't stop him. He pointed at her picture and said, "Zara," then at his, and said, "Jake." She rolled her eyes, but then took the pencil and started writing her language under her name. Strange symbols, sharp and curved, filled the page. Jake stared at them, then copied one of her letters with care. It was messy, but she didn't laugh. She pointed to the symbol and said the sound again. They did this for hours, trading words, building meaning, one word at a time. By morning, Jake could say 5 alien words. Zara could say 3 human ones, but one stood out the most: trust. She had said it slowly, like it tasted strange in her mouth, but she had said it. Jake had smiled, and she had looked away. Not because she was shy, but because the feeling scared her. Trust had gotten her betrayed before, but this time it felt different. Their peace didn't last. The scanner beeped again, 3 red dots, closing fast. Jake and Zara packed their gear in seconds. No time to run far, no place to hide properly. Zara looked outside and spotted a broken ventilation shaft under the shuttle, just big enough for 2. They slid in, barely fitting, breath held tight. Above them, the sounds of boots echoed on the metal floor. Voices spoke in her language, sharp and cold. Zara's eyes widened. She knew those voices. One of them belonged to the same commander who left her to die. Jake watched her face carefully. He saw the pain in her eyes turn into fire. She gripped her pistol but didn't move. Not yet. The commander's voice was calm, like nothing had ever happened. But Zara could hear the lie in every word. He was telling the hunters to search the area, saying the target, her, must be nearby. He promised extra credits for anyone who brought her back, dead or alive. Zara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. That breath held years of loyalty, rage, and broken promises. When she opened them, they burned with purpose as the enemy left. The shuttle, Zara and Jake crawled out from the vent. She didn't speak, didn't need to. He handed her a small comm device and pointed to the mountain range on the map. She nodded, already knowing what he meant. They had to reach that tower. It was their only chance to send a warning or a message, maybe both. But more than that, it was the only way for her voice to be heard again. This time, not through a translator, not through someone else. Her voice, her words, her truth. Jake started walking first, but Zara stopped him. She placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered something in her own tongue. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the look in her eyes. It was the same look he had seen in mirrors after battle. A look that said, "I'm not running anymore. I'm going to finish this, even if it kills me, and this time, I'm not doing it alone." The mountain path was cold, narrow, and quiet. Zara's boots crunched softly over the broken stone. Beside her, Jake walked with slow steps, his rifle held tight. Clouds covered the sky above them, heavy and gray. The signal tower was still. A day's journey away, but they could already feel its weight. It wasn't just a place. It was a choice. Once they reached it, there would be no turning back. They stopped inside a collapsed cargo station to rest. Jake searched the old boxes for supplies. Zara walked deeper into the ruins, drawn by something. She found a door half buried in dirt and wires. With some effort, she pushed it open and stepped. Inside, the room was dark, filled with old alien tech. Dust covered the panels, but they still glowed faintly. Zara moved slowly, her fingers brushing across the consoles. This place was familiar, but not from memory, from instinct. Her people used these stations long ago, before they became tools of war, before betrayal was normal. She tapped a cracked screen, and it sparked to life. Old files appeared in her native language. She began reading, slowly, eyes narrowing as the truth unfolded. The mission she had nearly died for wasn't just a failure. It was never meant to succeed. Her team had been sent in as bait, an excuse to justify a full invasion. The commanders needed a reason, and she had been their perfect lie. Her name, her squad, her sacrifice, all written in cold text. Approved, stamped, and buried. Jake entered the room and saw her standing still. He approached, his face serious as he looked at the screen. Zara pointed at the words, and then at herself. He understood only part of it, but the look on her face said enough. She was shaking, not from fear, but from fury. She stepped back and slammed her fist into the console. It sparked and went black. Jake didn't stop her. He just waited, letting her breathe, letting her break. When she turned to him, her voice was low but clear. "They lied," she said. Jake nodded slowly. Zara grabbed a small data chip from the wall and handed it to him. "This shows everything," she added. Jake took it carefully and placed it in a pouch on his vest. This wasn't just a message anymore, it was evidence, proof of betrayal, proof that she was never the traitor, and now they had to get it to someone who would listen. The night came fast as they climbed higher. The wind turned sharp, slicing through their clothes like blades. They camped under a ledge, using old tarps for cover. Jake built a small fire while Zara sat alone, her eyes fixed on the stars. He watched her in silence, knowing she wasn't thinking about the mission. She was thinking about all the people who left her to die, about the commander who gave the order, and the faces of the team that followed it without question. Zara touched her chest, feeling the scar under the armor. The wound had healed, but not the memory. Still, something inside her had changed. The silence that once felt like emptiness now carried weight. She looked at Jake and said, "You believe me?" He nodded once. "From the start," he answered. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened, just a little. It wasn't love, not yet, but something was growing, something stronger than duty. Before dawn, they were moving again. The tower came into view like a ghost rising from the mist. Tall, broken, but still standing. Zara's breath caught in her throat. This place held more than machines. It held a voice, a chance to be heard, a chance to speak after all this silence. They reached the base of the tower and climbed the crumbling stairs. Zara's fingers brushed over the old control panel. She inserted the data chip and watched as lights blinked to life. The signal system was weak, barely alive. Jake opened a box of human tech and connected it to the console. Wires sparked, and then the tower hummed. Zara pressed the record button and stared into the lens. Her voice shook at first, but she didn't stop. She spoke the names of her squad. She spoke of the betrayal, of the lies, of the pain, and then of the human who saved her. Jake stood behind her, silent, steady. The message ended, and she sent it. The signal shot into the sky like a burning arrow. Far away, someone would hear it. Someone would know the truth. Zara stepped back from the console and looked out across the valley. The wind blew strong, but she stood taller now. She was no longer the broken soldier left to die. She was the one who lived, who spoke, and now she would fight back. But deep below the tower, sensors blinked red. A hidden alert had been triggered, and her old commander now knew she was alive. He was already on his way, and he wasn't coming alone. Asterisk, the wind howled across the tower's edge. Zara stood there, quiet, watching the signal lights blink and fade. She had spoken her truth, sent her voice into the stars. Now the world knew. What her own people had tried to bury, Jake stood behind her, his hand resting on the grip of his rifle. He didn't say anything, but he was ready. They both knew this peace wouldn't last. Far below the mountain, a dark ship landed without sound. Its engines released a low hum like a warning. Soldiers in black stepped out, their armor shining with the mark of command. At the front walked Commander Velas, the man who had once called Zara his best. His face was cold, his eyes sharper than blades. He looked up at the tower and smiled. Slightly. She lived, he said, not surprised. She sent a message, whispered the officer beside him. Commander Velas nodded slowly. Then we erase it. Zara didn't sleep that night. She sat near the fire with her knife in hand. She remembered Velas' voice too well, how it sounded before he gave the order to leave her. He had looked right at her and said nothing. That silence had cut deeper than any wound. Now he was coming, and she wasn't afraid. She was ready by morning. Jake had set up defenses, trip mines, signal jammers, fallback paths. Zara moved through the tower like a shadow, marking sniper spots and ambush zones. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war on her terms. Then they heard it. A soft pulse in the air, followed by a sharp whine. The tower's systems began to shut down one by one. Jake checked the console and frowned. EMP field, he said. Zara already knew they were jamming everything. No one else would hear her message now, unless she protected the original data chip. Explosions hit the mountain base an hour later. Jake took position at the western wall while Zara covered the high ground. She saw them coming, dozens of soldiers in black. Her people, the same kind of soldiers she once led. But they didn't carry honor anymore. They carried orders. Commander Velas walked at the front, calm. Without a weapon in his hand, Zara aimed her rifle at him, her finger tight on the trigger. But she didn't shoot, not yet. He raised his voice, deep and cold. Zara, he called. I gave you a chance to die with purpose. You wasted it. She didn't answer. Jake whispered through the cum. Wait for my mark. Zara stayed still, heart steady, hands calm. Velas raised his hand and Jake fired. The first blast knocked down the front line. Zara leapt from her spot and fired from above, the air filled with smoke, plasma, and screams. They moved like one, Jake and Zara covering each other, shifting positions. Every shot she fired felt like justice. Every step she took pushed back against the silence that once trapped her. Jake took a hit to the shoulder but kept fighting. Zara dragged him behind cover and ripped open his vest. He winced, but grinned. You hit harder than they do, he joked. Zara didn't laugh, but her lips twitched. The fight lasted hours. Bodies dropped, flames rose, and the tower shook with the weight of it all. Then the final wave came, led by Velas himself. He entered the tower calmly, walking over broken bodies. Zara stepped out to face him, alone. Jake tried to stop her, but she shook her head. This is mine, she said. Velas looked at her with no fear, only cold pity. You could have been a leader, he said. You could have ruled beside me. You chose a human instead. Zara stared at him, eyes burning. You chose to lie, she replied. You left me to die. She raised her weapon. Velas raised his hand, but it wasn't a surrender. It was a signal. More soldiers poured in, but Jake was already moving. He fired from behind, cutting down the guards. Zara charged forward, slamming Velas against the wall. They fought hand to hand, no weapons, no words, just the truth in every punch. Every strike, Velas was strong, but Zara was no longer broken. She slammed him to the ground and held her blade to his throat. He looked up at her and smiled. "You think this changes anything?" He whispered. "No," she said, "but now I can finally breathe." She left him there, broken and silent. Jake stood nearby, bloodied but alive. She walked over and helped him up. No more lies, no more silence. They had won, not just the fight, but the right to live without chains. Outside, the wind carried the last of the smoke away. Above them, the sky slowly cleared, and somewhere in the stars her message still floated, waiting to be heard. The smoke had cleared. The battle was over. The tower stood tall against the morning sky, scarred but still whole. Zara sat quietly on the edge of the landing platform, her armor cracked, her body bruised. Beside her, Jake lay with his back against the wall, breathing slow but steady. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to anymore. The silence around them was different now. Not the silence of fear or betrayal. This silence felt earned. It was the kind that came after a storm, after a choice had been made. Zara looked at the signal console still blinking in the distance. The chip was safe, stored deep inside the tower's core. Her message was backed up, encrypted, waiting to be pulled by any system within range. It was only a matter of time before someone heard it. And when they did, everything would change. Her people would have to answer for what they did, and the galaxy would know the truth. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cold air. It no longer felt like poison. Jake stirred and looked at her with tired eyes. "You okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She nodded slowly, then after a pause said, "Now yes." That simple word meant everything. Jake smiled, weak but real. Zara reached into her belt and pulled out a folded cloth. Inside was a silver badge once, a symbol of her rank, now only a memory. She looked at it for a long time, then handed it to Jake. He frowned, confused, but she just nodded, her eyes soft. "You kept me alive," she whispered. "You saw me when no one else did." Jake held the badge carefully like it might break. It was more than metal. It was trust. It was respect. And something more. A transport signal lit up from a nearby beacon, one of the few still working. Zara stood and helped Jake to his feet. They had sent a request for extraction just before the battle. Now it had been answered. A human ship was coming. When the shuttle arrived, Zara and Jake stood side by side as the ramp lowered. Human soldiers stepped out first, followed by medics. They looked at Zara with uncertain eyes, but when they saw Jake nod toward her, they said nothing. Zara walked aboard without fear. She didn't need to prove anything anymore later. In a clean medical room with bright lights and warm sheets, Jake rested. Zara sat nearby, staring at the stars through the wide window. This was her first time on a human ship. It felt strange, but not wrong. She didn't belong to any world. Now not fully, not to her people, not to Earth, but she belonged to something real now. A bond that had survived betrayal, pain, and war. Jake woke up and looked at her. "You could go anywhere now," he said. Zara turned to him and replied softly, "So could you," he smiled. "Any place you want to go?" He asked. She thought for a moment, then answered, "Wherever you are." He laughed quietly, then winced from the pain. She leaned closer, placed a hand over his. This was not a battlefield anymore. This was something new, something uncertain but warm. Not a command, not a mission, but a beginning. Zara had been betrayed, left for dead, and hunted like a shadow. But she had lived, she had fought back, and she had spoken. And in doing so, she had found someone who saw her, not as a weapon, not as a threat, but as a person, and maybe more than that. As the ship flew through the stars, Zara looked out the window one last time. She whispered a word in her language, soft, quiet, and full of meaning. It meant peace. It meant home. And for the first time in her life, she meant it.